you. So this is a committee meeting to discuss updates to our smart city plan. My name is Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Ryan, Councilor Boyle, Councilor Thompson, Councilor Rudd, and Councilor Allen. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll get started?
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Sam Edelstein. I'm the city's chief data officer. A few other folks around the room who may chime in, specifically Lonnie Bornstein, who is helping us with the specific acquisition of the streetlights. So may call on some folks to help if you have any questions that I can't answer. I've distributed a presentation that I can walk through. Feel free to interrupt me as I'm going through. Also, it's up there as well and can provide it to you afterwards. You know, there were a couple of questions at the last study session specifically about the acquisition of streetlights and just some questions about numbers and how are we thinking about that acquisition. So we're acquiring more than 17,000 streetlights and upgrading them all to LED. That ultimately allows us to achieve better energy efficiency. It should help us save millions of dollars both in maintenance and then also energy savings once we're able to appropriately meter how much energy we're using. Now, those lights, the luminaires, are actually on different types of poles. So depending on exactly what the makeup of that pole is, we may own the entire thing, the pole as well as the light. We may just own the light. It really depends on how National Grid delivers its electricity. That determines how we're doing it. So we are going to be acquiring approximately 12,755 lights that are on wooden poles, about 2,300 on metal poles, another 2,300 on decorative poles, and then all of the lights themselves are expected to last about 100,000 hours. There's a 10-year warranty on them, but 100,000 hours is much more than 10 years. This should be a multi-decade project. So that's the streetlights themselves. We're acquiring them from National Grid. This was made possible through legislation from the state level and the New York Power Authority, and so that's kind of how we're getting into this. As part of the discussion and how we are evaluating these lights, so one of the exciting parts of the streetlights themselves is that we are going to be able to know when they're on and off. So if there's a streetlight that suddenly goes out, we don't need to rely on someone complaining to us about the streetlight being out. We'll get a signal immediately. So we can send a crew out, hopefully before anyone notices, or certainly before there are a bunch of different complaints about it. So that we can make sure the light is on, which of course is good for public safety and ensuring that we have appropriate street lighting. We also will be able to do things like dimming and brightening the lights. So at sunrise or sunset, we could dim or brighten the lights based on how dark or light it is outside. In the case of an emergency, we could brighten the lights. If first responders needed to go to a specific block, we could brighten the lights on that block so that we knew that they could see. Those are things that we don't have the same ability to do right now. But this allows us to do that. I think you all know the project is in process now. We're in the process of figuring out which company will provide us this ability to control the lights in this way. We expect to have a decision on that within the next month, and then we'll go into a design phase where we're figuring out how to actually roll them out. And so that's exciting to have going on there. Are there any questions on this right now? Yeah.
For the dimming of the lights you're talking about, so who's going to be in control of that?
Yeah, so it'll be the Department of Public Works ultimately will oversee that. There will be discussions, I think, generally about exactly what that looks like. I don't think would say, you know, if a specific person in the community said, I want my light dimmed more than others, that's probably not something that we would do, although we could. So I think it'll be a discussion about what sort of lighting is appropriate for different parts of the city, whether it's on a main road versus a residential road. And I think I'll say this a bunch of times as we go through this presentation, but we see all of this as a collaborative approach where I don't think that there's just one person or one department that's making the decisions. We'll look to test and see what works best so that we can make the proper decision about what's appropriate for the city as a whole.
So I guess my question, you know, so one, who physically is going to make the decision? Is there somebody staffing this position? who has the authority to staff this position and who has the authority to make the decision?
Sure. So I don't know specifically about that, but I can certainly find out that answer. But the actual maintenance of the lights will be done within DPW, and then
any changing of the lights would have to meet RPA, and that's part of the engineering design. So if it is going to be dimmed, it still has to meet the requirements of that to reduce the liabilities to the city. So it's not going to be arbitrary. It's going to be in a way that we always meet the minimum requirement.
So this doesn't sound like it'll be staffed, so to say, but more programmed ahead of time.
Say that again?
Doesn't sound like it'll be staffed, so to say, but more programmed ahead of time.
The project has a person.
Yes.
The project has the funding for one full-time person and administrative help as well. There will be somebody that'll have to do the day-to-day and all these other things, and that would be part of that job duty. Because once you have the system in place, it's not really hard to do. You just have to set the parameters, and that would probably come with whoever we choose, correct, to help do that. But the engineering part of it is you're going to dim them to a point that you always are covering yourself so that you meet the minimum requirements. Perfect example of this is you go out here in the middle of the day, or when you leave tonight, you have high conflict area, you need a higher lighting level. At 2 in the morning or at 3 in the morning, where your conflict areas are reduced, you can dim it accordingly. So it's going to be an engineered design as far as the dimming. Even if the person who's making that decision, it still has to be part of the software where you can't go any lower than an amount that we're not open to liability.
And then to the idea of like emergency services going down a road or needing, how would that system?
so that's part of the discussion about exactly what some of these different vendors can provide and exactly what that looks like. But there's the potential that within a geofenced area, so within 100 feet or 500 feet or a mile, you could say all the lights within that radius should be brightened to a certain amount. So some of that will be, I think, us sort of understanding what the need and the benefit is, and then we would go through and talk about if it makes sense to test it and pilot it, and then see if it helps.
This is me jumping out of turn, Sam, so you can correct me, but I would imagine that initially when we're rolling this out and it's literally just the LED lights, it's probably not something we're going to be doing day to day, but as the future evolves and as we have more Internet of Things and there's maybe wireless connected to a fire truck or a police, then there might be a better idea in 10 years to be able to say, all right, there's 3 police vehicles on this street and that's connected to the lights, which will then brighten it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of this is, I think we have some set ideas about how things can work and how they will work immediately. So the ability to know that a light is on and off, the ability to remotely dim or brighten a light is there. How we apply it in a variety of different circumstances, I think, is up for discussion, and what I'll continue to address as we go through all the other types of things that we look to do as we get into this smart city space.
We'll be able to change the colors like we will at City Hall.
We can't do no colors right this second, although that would be very cool. After a basketball win, we could do some orange.
Yeah, right? St. Patrick's Day.
There you go. So just going on, just to hit home the point a little bit more, we'll have 17,000 of these lights, all with these nodes on top of the luminaire that will go back to a central database where we can do that control. So there's a network that will be created through all of these different lights that give us constant information, which is really exciting. It's a chance to collect new information that we haven't had before. It allows us to provide better services. It also will require us to think critically about how do we manage that. It's a lot of data that will come our way very quickly, and so it's not a menial task to manage all of it. It does allow us also, though, to start thinking about how do we connect other things to this lighting system, or just how do we think about networking and bringing in additional information that comes from sensors to think about how we're managing the city as a whole. And so that's what I'll get to a little bit more now, moving away from specifically lights and more into sort of the smart city space.
You just triggered a thought
Sure.
that I had. Is it inclusive, the computer hardware that is necessary to make this function? Is that inclusive in the
Yes. Yep. So the control and the dashboards that come with managing the system will be a part of the purchase that we're making.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Just because there's so many, we can see the whole thing, but
Yeah.
there's like a lot of pictures and not
Skipping
a lot
ahead.
of like I am because it's a lot of pictures. But I'm sure you have awesome stuff with the pictures.
Thanks.
But the timeline, the question I get all the time is like, when is it going to happen? When will we own them? When do we not call National Grid to fix the light? What's the plan to maintain the light?
Yep. Yeah. So all of the upgrade should be done. The LED specific upgrade should be done this time next year. That's our understanding. Right now, we're in the process of actually purchasing the lights from National Grid. There's some specific legal stuff that has to go back and forth, and agreements that have to go on for us to actually acquire them. That acquisition should happen early in the spring. Where we'll actually own them, and then we'll be responsible for the maintenance as they're being upgraded. And Lonnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but as they're being upgraded, the construction crew and New York Power Authority will be responsible for if a light goes out, they'll be responsible for fixing it then. But then once they've turned them over to us, which is when we finalize the transaction and actually pay the money to acquire them, then we'll have full ownership over them. So this time next year, or even October of next year, we'll be able to have, or October of this year, that'll be our responsibility.
And that we're going to do with like one person going around changing light? Like, how does that happen?
We'll likely contract for that service.
We budgeted for a maintenance contract to be responsible, when we'll actually have faster response than what we.
You gotta come up. No one can hear you. Sorry.
I thought usually I have,
Sit right
usually
there.
my voice carries far enough that I don't need a mic, so this is new to me. Usually I'm told to be quiet, so. Okay. Okay, it's set up to use a maintenance contract to do all the repairs because of act of nature type scenario. And in that contract, it has all the different caveats, so they could hire more short-term if need be. But the bottom line is, the person who's running it isn't doing the repairs. He's verifying that the contractor is doing repairs sufficiently and they're getting billed correctly, and they're gonna be in charge of how the work is performed and in what order.
So what division of DPW is this falling under?
It's probably going to be a street lighting coordinator. That would be the job title. I mean, I did that before because right now we do own assets, and it's just going to be more of the same, but it's going to be a day-to-day, and there's going to be budget changes that are going to be required. I've reached out to 3 different departments so that they can get ready to take the role on of being the utility as far as responsibilities. Parks will be in charge of canopy and tree trimming. Engineering will have to help with writing the standards, because now we are going to be the utility. And DPW, according to charter, is responsible for street lighting, so all that will fall underneath them. So it's going to be multiple departments. But the savings is quite significant, and we can do a lot of this with already existing assets.
Maybe a dumb question, but does National Grid currently contract out the service to replace the light bulbs? Are we going to end up hiring the same person that does the light bulbs now? National Grid has a website where you can report outages. Do we need to build a website? How does that enter into the equation?
There is no light bulb. There's approximately anywhere from 60 to 120 individual LEDs in the fixture.
Whatever,
So
when the light doesn't turn on anymore, who goes and fixes it? Light bulb,
the
not
maintenance
light bulb.
contractor.
I know, but
They have a bulbist that changes the bulb. They have 2 crews that National Grid does for all their service area in central New York.
so
that
right
all
now
those people-
National Grid does actually
They have
change
their own
light
employees.
themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
But part of this, Sam, is we'll know that the light's out. You don't need to report it. It's just we know it's out.
So we do have current city line services where you can call in and report a pothole, and so there will continue to be a way for someone to complain, but the intention is that that doesn't need to happen anymore. We would be signaled automatically that that the light is off.
And unlike just complaining, we want it fixed, because the concern now is with, I know NIMO, I have people all the time call on these, and we'll send them, and they don't get, nothing's done.
So it would be our responsibility to do that, and we
So
would
are
have
we,
a service
we're gonna
level
have to have a
agreement with them.
crew of 2 people, and, or Similar to what they have now? Is this it?
No, what happens is the street lighting coordinator would generate a work order.
Yeah, there you go. Good job.
That's okay. The street lighting coordinator generates a work order. He sends it to the contractor. He does the work. Contractor sends back saying it's completed. Then it goes through the stream to get paid. So really, it's designed just so it's going to mimic Rochester's. I mean, this just isn't, there's been extensive research about how we're going to do this, and they're only going to get paid X amount for certain things that they do. So if there is a good year where we don't have a lot of outages and natural causes, we'll be able to use them to do some of our CRP improvements and other things, and it's all written that way, so it's a pay-as-you-go and not to exceed. So it's actually a pretty nice thing. In Rochester, they're so happy with the way it's worked and how much they've saved. It's quite significant. We're going to actually save on both ends, because now we're only paying for something that they're actually doing, where with National Grid, we're paying constantly whether they do something or not.
And the threshold for the light, so there's whatever 60 components to the fixture. How many of them have to be out before they'll fix it?
Well, that's a good question. If I sat there and had the light on and I took it down to 80%, your eye might not even catch the difference. So it would have to be a significant number of them to fail. And then they would go out, and there's certain things that the contractor is going to have mandated that he has in his access to, fixtures, repair equipment and whatnot. He would go, send the light back. You can either rebuild it or toss it out and put up a new one. But for 10 years, you're warranted for the parts. For the first year, I believe it's labor and parts.
So should we have some sort of policy that, should there be an in-house policy of anything under 50%, you know, working inside the fixture?
Actually, I think if someone calls, you know what? I take it back. Going back to the node, it'll self-diagnose. You can see what the wattage is, and you'll know. This not only does, it tells you the status, it tells you the draw, it tells you the location, GPS coordinates. It does quite a bit. So I think you'll know by looking at it. The person who is your street lighting coordinator should be able to verify all this and just put a query in that anything that's falling short of a certain output, and it'll come back and you'll see a reading.
Yeah, but do we know what that output is?
I think we can set it to what we want, and I think if it's within 80% of what it started with, that'd be fine, because it'd be really hard to see that difference. But it's new, and we will probably do some research to see what others have done who have installed LEDs in other places.
Great, thanks.
Councilor Green, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So just going back to the capacity of our workforce, is this a situation where we have a potential to hire new people, or we're just recycling employees?
Specifically for lighting or for this entire initiative?
For the entire initiative.
Yeah, I think there will certainly be ways that we are looking to increase workforce on this specific place. I don't know exactly where that is, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but as we change the way that we do our work, there will certainly be new demand for types of skill sets that we need.
Okay.
Good? Okay. All right, so getting on to more specifically on smart cities, I know that you all wanted an update on that. So I hear people talk about smart cities all the time. There's really not a definition for what it means, and so you'll hear a lot of different people talk about a lot of different things. So what I'll try and do is define how we think about it, at least, which may not be exactly how, if you're reading a magazine that's talking about it, they define it. Like I said, there's not a consistent way that anyone defines it. We see it as more than just sensors and more than things like that. So in this presentation, I'll try and address exactly what we see as that, to hopefully give you a sense of where our vision is there. Before I get to that, just talking about why we want to be a smart city and why we're even taking on this initiative. We look back to history definitions of what is now called the fourth industrial revolution that we're entering into. The first industrial revolution, at least in Syracuse, is when the Erie Canal was built. We had large government investment in infrastructure that allowed for businesses to thrive, innovation to happen, invention to happen, and that made Syracuse a thriving city across the country. The second industrial revolution was very much about increasing manufacturing, which of course Syracuse also thrived as a part of. The third industrial revolution was about computing and networking, which the city largely missed out on, both through a loss of population and also just because we didn't sort of take the jump into embracing that third industrial revolution. Now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, which is very much about machines being connected together through the internet and being able to communicate and increase efficiency and capacity of what machines are able to do on their own, but then also what humans can do. And so we see this as an opportunity for us to jump ahead and be a leader in that space again. A lot of it really sort of calls back to the history that we have. So instead of building canals, we're purchasing a large utility that will create networks that we think can increase connectivity and ultimately expand not only the way that we're able to do our work internally as a city government, but then also allow our citizens to thrive in a variety of ways. So that's like the basis of why we're trying to do this. We also think that we are already smart. So again, just going back to some of what the definition of a smart city is, and not just considering it as sensors and computers and things like that. We do a lot of things that we think are going well. Now, we can always improve, but this year under the Mayor Walsh's administration, we launched a performance management program where we are constantly looking. This morning we were talking about budgeting and looking at data to see if we're meeting the metrics that we've set for ourselves. We budget based on historic spending. We make decisions about how we address infrastructure issues using data and information and evidence. And so there's always room to expand there, but we can't be a smart city if we aren't using data and evidence and information to make those decisions. And no matter the types of sensors or whatever technology that we invest in, if we aren't doing some baseline things like asking questions about what does the data show us, we won't be smart. And so we feel like we need to do both things to be able to thrive here. So really, I think what we see as the opportunity here is that we need to identify what a societal or an internal governmental problem is that we want to address. And then if there's a technology or a technological solution to help solve that problem, then we would use that to scale. But it's not by default that we would go with technology just because it seems cool or it's shiny. It's a shiny object that we should be attracted to. But if it helps, if there's a technology that we can use to improve the way that we're doing things, then we should scale and expand and identify more things to address. And so we think that there are opportunities through this streetlight network purchase and then additional sensor opportunities that we'll talk about to really be able to do our jobs better and to make life better here. So just getting into a little bit more into the vision. So ultimately, the first thing that we want to talk about and the first priority with our smart city vision is to increase connectivity citywide. We know that according to recent census data, the city of Syracuse, only about 1 in 2 people have access to broadband connectivity and a computer in their home. So in a world where when you get homework assigned to you and you need to use the internet to do your homework, where you have a phone that has a bunch of apps that allow you to apply for jobs or to get around, to check your bus schedule, or to watch movies, not having connectivity in your home is really problematic as we try to think about how do we scale our population and ensure that our population can keep up with the way that the world is changing. So baseline, anything that we talk about and think about here, there are a lot of exciting things that we could do with sensors and other things like that, but we need to have connectivity as a baseline piece of this. We think that all of this has to be human-centered and problem-oriented, so there are a lot of people who you'll hear talking about, oh, well, we can have a sensor that tells us if our trash cans are filled, and that's great, certainly important. I don't think that will address things in that specific way. I think we'll want to think more holistically about where are the problems that we want to solve, whether it's just increasing efficiency on a government end or, again, thinking about how we improve life for our community overall. And then think about where, again, could technology help us here? It isn't by default that it will, but in the case that it can, then then that's something worth looking at. We know that we can't do this all on our own. To your question about who's making these decisions and who's controlling these things, I think our answer generally would be we don't know the right answer to almost any of it. We would want to fall back on the ultimate vision of how do we create connectivity, increase connectivity, how do we address problems that we're seeing in the city, and then relying on partners, whether it's private companies that are building here that are trying to figure out solutions on their own that they could test here, whether it's our universities that do research on policy or best practices or where we should be thinking about going in the future. We know that we'll need to be able to think about that sort of partnership, even with some of our telecommunications companies as they're thinking about how do they roll out fiber networks and 5G, which is sort of the next generation of cell service. We'll need to find how to partner with them because we first of all, we can't do it on our own because we don't know all the answers. And second of all, it's expensive and we can't take on that entire burden. So relying on that partnership will be important. And then ultimately, obviously, ensuring that we have improved city services and efficiencies that are created by being able to route our vehicles better or only going to the places that need attention first, or even going back to the streetlights, making sure that we're addressing streetlight issues as soon as they happen rather than waiting for multiple complaints. That's where we want to go. So that's the vision that we see here. There's a lot there and a lot of nuance, but that's how we kind of define what we're going for as a smart city. I'll stop there if there are any questions, or I can keep on going. So the next slide is, I thought it might be interesting just to show how we consider where there might be some opportunity to use some of these sensors and things that are either available or sort of conceptually available, so that we could you can think about creatively how we might use some of this technology, but then also how we'll sort of approach some of these things. So this is looking down Salina Street from Washington. And so I just put on a few different potential applications for where an increased network and sensors could help here. So we talked about responsive streetlights. If there were an issue that we wanted to brighten or dim the lights, we can do that through this network. Connected traffic lights, we talked a few weeks ago about the Interconnect project. We see building out a network and using sensors to better control our traffic lights and streamline as a real possibility. All of this, again, just to reiterate, we need to sort of figure out exactly how that works in Syracuse. A lot of this stuff has not been deployed at scale really anywhere in the world. And so that's exciting because we can potentially be a leader here. It also is a little bit scary because there are decisions that will have to be made without a ton of examples having happened elsewhere. But connected traffic lights are certainly a potential here. Telling if our catch basins are full, so having a sensor in a catch basin that senses if it's filling up too quickly, so that then we can proactively go and clean it out so that the street doesn't flood. And then maybe we can start to predict if that catch basin will flood under certain conditions so that we don't even need the sensor there anymore. We just use data to predict what might happen so that we, again, can proactively go there. Same thing for our trash cans. If they're filled and our sanitation crews are going around and checking every single one, the sensor may be able to tell them so that they only have to go to the ones that are actually filled. Priority buses, we know that transportation, especially to get to work, public transportation is not always at the level that we would like to see it for our community. So giving priority bus lanes, making sure that buses can get through the city as quickly as possible to the places that they need to go, we think is a possibility here too. And then one other example, although this, and I'll just preemptively say that, paying attention to privacy and security is a really important thing that I think about all the time and that we need to have as a consideration here. But there is the potential to be able to count how many people are walking across the street or walking down a block, which could tell us about traffic safety, pedestrian safety. It could also tell us.
So the only thing, I hate to
sir.
interrupt, but
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna. Because we talk about the data, and we're like, oh, the data, all this data. But like, it has to be, there's only so much capacity for taking in the information.
Yep.
So the top tier has to be data that will change our decisions.
Yep.
But that's the part that I don't always hear in these presentations. It has to be a clear connection to how we make decisions, how we can save money, do what we do more cheaply, produce new revenue, and add value in the long term. But there's no point in my opinion, if we're gonna do something like the bus thing, we don't need the pedestrian data to make a bus rapid transit route. It's not Manhattan where buses are slowed down by cars. It's cars are slowed down by buses that are stopped, and buses can go as fast as they want because there's not that much traffic. It's just having we could do that without any more data. It's just a commitment to get the resources and the buses and all of that. So we don't need more data to make that decision or that investment. So I just think we have to be really careful about what is it that we're actually doing and how does it, and before I got elected, I sat in IT meetings where people said, we don't focus on saving money. Like the focus has to be saving money, producing new revenue to bring in new money, and doing things that way. And I sometimes I'm like, oh, we get too excited about the overall big unknownness of data.
The ultimate purpose of data is to create efficiency and better service. That's the bottom line. And if our collecting data helps Central or any other service entity in our community also make efficient and service productive decisions, then that's another use of data. But the ultimate reason for data is efficiency, whether it's budgetary or service delivery.
But I just think you have to put the savings or the value first, because otherwise you won't get the right data. So it's almost like there has to be a sense of, oh, well, this data will help us cut the cost of trash collection in half. This data will help us reduce the need for police officers by 25% or something like that.
So one of Sam's slides that talked about how we're doing OKRs at our department head meetings is doing exactly that. So we're looking at defined data thresholds to help us determine, are we spending resources in the right place or at the right time or should we at all, based on how efficient the service is being provided by the amount of time it's taking to do it. Maybe we're not the people that should even be providing the service based on the data we're getting. So the bottom line of data, right, I'm not a data geek. I'm gonna make sure it gets done efficiently geek. And so that is the bottom line, efficiency and service delivery to our residents. I'm not a data geek either. I just said I'm not one.
It's in my job title, so I'll.
I think that I think sort of what you're both saying, the data can be overwhelming. You know, we can literally get data all day. And is the city prioritizing areas and sort of backfilling with data, or are we letting the data that we get sort of drive? Because it almost seems like if we let the data that we get drive us, we're almost steering out of control without a plan.
No, it's both of those points are important, and I think that it goes back to the initial pieces of the vision that we talked about. So with regard to this, one of the pieces of the vision is to ensure that we're increasing efficiency and our service delivery. The other piece is ensuring that we're being human-centered and problem-solving oriented. And so, Councilor Rudd, to your point about we need to be saving money or we need to reduce whatever we're doing so that we're doing this more efficiently, that identifying that issue is what would lead us to say this is data that we don't currently have that we need to collect. So for example, specifically on counting people walking across an intersection, I worked with the engineering department earlier this year where we were thinking about pedestrian safety as in different intersections because there was a grant opportunity to upgrade different intersections and make them safer in a variety of ways. We know how many people get hit by cars at different intersections. We don't know how many people walk across the street. So if I said to you, well, we have $1 million to spend on upgrading X number of intersections in the city, but that will only cover, half of those intersections. So how do we make that decision about which ones to address? We didn't have the denominator of how many people were crossing the street to know, is that the most dangerous intersection versus...
See, so here I would take it to another level on the focus on saving money, because we're a borderline broke city who has to save money and get more money in order to survive and be autonomous, right?
Sure.
So it's not, I don't know what the path to counting people and saving money and getting more money is.
Sure.
So I would almost say I view you as a highly talented person who also has a life, who has so many hours to work. So we don't have 10 of you, we don't have, all that. So what you spend time on, there's an opportunity cost to it. So you have to be pointed toward the things where we're going to get the most value. And I would almost say my reaction is don't count people on any sidewalk anywhere, because that's not the highest opportunity of your time. And there's got to be other versions where we can have tangible savings and value adds that are clear. Like,
Point well taken. These are just examples of things that we could do. It's not the things that we will do.
But
so
just to because in the past we talked about predicting where water main breaks would happen.
Yeah.
Why does that help us if we still wait for it to break to go fix it? Or if it breaks, how does it change what we do? How does it make what we do use less resources or produce more value that really improves our finances? And if not, then you should be focused on a different thing.
Sure.
Right? So,
and we can get into that. We think that we save more than $1.5 million because of that, but we can talk about that offline more if you'd like. I think that the point of it is that going back to the vision itself, it's figuring out what are the problems that we want to solve. And if it is we need to save money and that is the specific thing that we do, we already know that the acquisition of the streetlights, that specific decision should save us $3+ million per year. So those things are the kind of things that we'll do. I think the additional piece to your point about me having a life outside of work is I don't think this is not just me presenting this. This is the administration as a whole and something that we're embracing.
So let's just do this because we're running short. Do you want to just go through your last couple slides and then we can all
absolutely.
run through?
So just to sort of hit on that a little bit more, we do think that there are a variety of benefits between streamlined services, opportunities for research and training. We have a leading research university that is very interested in doing these kind of projects with us to analyze data and figure out policy and all of those kind of things. There's no one else in upstate New York doing this really at a scale that we're thinking about. And so that gives us some benefit and opportunity to attract others who are interested in starting businesses here, to use the data that we're generating to figure out the appropriate path forward on different decisions that we're making. Grant opportunities, public-private partnerships, these are things that we see coming from here. Obviously, there's a lot to figure out within that, but that's part of the vision that we're seeing and the reason why we're spending any time on this. Getting back to some of the initial discussion about connectivity, we also think that this provides us an opportunity for Wi-Fi. So here, we could envision having Wi-Fi nodes on different parts of the city or potentially citywide eventually. That again would allow that baseline level of connectivity, which we think not only allows us to improve city services, it hits home at that initial point that we have a city population that does not have the connectivity that even other parts of upstate New York have. And so pushing for a baseline level of connectivity citywide is really critical, and this project could get there at some point. And just, hitting home a little bit more on this again, the public-private partnerships, investment in things like fiber and Wi-Fi, and working with telecoms to install 5G nodes across the city so that we can handle an increased demand on data from the city as a whole, we can start to see things like autonomous vehicles that, you know, may seem like they're several decades away. They likely are not. And so having a baseline infrastructure to accommodate for things like that could be really important. Allowing people to have better access on their phones or on their computers at home so that they can have connection to the things that they need to have connection to is really critical. And then again, hitting back to the initial point that I made about, you know, when kids have homework that they need to be online to do, making sure that they have the ability to do that without having to have a really expensive cable contract at home is important. And then the last thing that I just want to close out with, because I think it's the most important thing, is just embracing the need to think about privacy and security here. So on the security front, we'll have 17,000 plus nodes around the city that all could be a vulnerability for some kind of security breach. So being purposeful about how we ensure that things are locked down so that only the people who have access to the technology are the ones who should is really important. The other piece is privacy. As we collect more and more data, that means that we're collecting data on our residents. And so being upfront and open about the data that we're collecting, making that data publicly available, which we already do on the data that we have internally to a large degree, and expanding this to the data that we're collecting through sensors, I think allows us to create a trust mechanism between what we're doing, and so that we don't turn into a surveillance state, which I think there are cities who are doing this kind of work that likely would be. And so that's not something that we want to get to. And so ensuring that, you know, through the partnerships that we have with universities in the area, understanding what that policy should look like will be really critical. So that's that. Happy to take any questions.
Oh, sorry, I just have one question,
Yeah.
and it's on the security portion of it. I'm sure that with this technology comes concern about firewalls and all this, because if this is, how often does NIMO now, do we have an idea of how often they're being attacked and stuff like this? You read about it in the paper all the time, you hear about it, I mean, the concern that if we take this over, which we're going to, what is the cost going to be for us?
Yeah.
To prevent those from trying to do this and whatnot.
So specifically, the way that National Grid is controlling the streetlights is totally different to how we'll do it. So I don't think there's a comparison there. But I mean, Dave, if you want to give an overview of like our security strategy now. And how we'll sort of embrace.
Because I know that you say you'll send out emails that say that, you know, you've got breaches, you know, or attempts.
But there's going to be a firewall, a separation between the city network, which we run our finances and payroll and water billing on, and this network. They're not going to necessarily be one and the same. There's going to be a complete separation there, just to eliminate those. We have exposure too. People try and hack into us, and the deputy mayor got one yesterday, and we train folks on how to do it. She did exactly what you're supposed to do, report it to us, we check it out, it's bogus, we get rid of it. So people attack us all day long. I'm sure they're getting attacked 100 times an hour, right? Because if some kid sitting in their basement could say they hacked into National Grid, in some areas that's something to brag about. So we're going to keep this network as robust as it's going to be, separate from a lot of our inner workings as of now. I would just add one thing. When you look at all the sensors, talk about monitoring traffic flow and pedestrians, just remember, right now we're thinking about it as it is now, but in 2 or 3 years, that highway's coming down. And that is going to be an enormous change, both during the construction, however long that takes, and after. So what better chance do we have than to have this technology to be able to react quickly and take advantage of these new opportunities?
Move traffic.
So, Thank you.
Yeah, that's true.
Councilor Boyle.
I'm good. Sounds
Councilor
great.
Allen?
Sounds exciting.
Good. Tim? Rudd?
Yeah, I have more, but it's fine.
So, Sam, I think this is great. I think what's great about this is that a lot of times municipal government is very reactive, and this is an opportunity for us to be kind of forward-thinking and planning for the future. I think what we've all identified and what you're saying here is, you know, here's what we've identified as the opportunities, and I think the next step is going to be what are the specific things we want to do with these opportunities, and what do we want to prioritize as a city. So I think what I would propose we do is I'll just put a quarterly meeting on where you can say, you know, here's the next steps in these 2 or 3 projects we want to do and how we think we can move the ball forward and what our progress is. And that way we're able to, you know, kind of keep this on a fast track to make sure we're moving forward on it. So
That sounds great.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Just for consideration of the district counselors, when you guys do roll everything out, is there a way that you can communicate something to us that we'll be able to communicate with the residents, so that way we won't get a bunch of phone calls as to what's going on and why?
I think we would rely on you to provide that sort of education to your constituents. So yes, absolutely.
And can you make it like reader friendly?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask at every quarterly meeting, how much money have you saved us? How much money are you gonna save us? How much more money are you bringing in? And how much more money are you gonna go get us?
I'm gonna come ready, Counselor.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Thank you.